And good morning. Typically, Transfiguration Sunday as itself is before the process of Lent. But this year I preached something different on that Sunday, the Sunday before the beginning of Lent. And this is the lectionary reading for today. But I talked about last week that God has, there's reasons why God has things work out. And I think there's a reason why this worked out, that I came to this on this Sunday, and we'll just run with it. Since He's given it to us, we'll run with it, right, Scott? What Jesus gives us, we'll run with it. So we're looking at the Gospel of Matthew. We're now in the 17th chapter. We're looking at verses 1 through 9, and this is the Transfiguration of Christ. 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and his brother John and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with him. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will make 3 dwellings here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." While he was speaking, suddenly a bright cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud a voice said, "This is my Son, the beloved. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell to the ground and were overcome by fear. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, "Get up and do not be afraid." When they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus himself alone. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus ordered them, "Tell no one about the vision until after the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." And here, this is, I believe, the first time in Matthew's Gospel that Jesus specifically stated that he would be raised from the dead. But that's not the point I'm going to get at today with this. Here we have this transfiguration, this change, and that's what it means, the metamorphosis. It is very much like the whole thing with the caterpillar and the butterflies. I talked with the children. Jesus is changed before them. He becomes something glorious and shining with the very light of God. And they look up and they see him conversing with Moses and Elijah. And of course, this is a reference to the Old Testament. You have the books of Moses and you have the books of the prophets. So you have the Old Testament with the New. And of course, Peter is befuddled by this and doesn't know what to do. And wouldn't you too be befuddled? Because when we are seeing something that is life-changing, generally we are not 100% sure what to do, are we? And so Peter says, "Let me build a tabernacle." That's what the word is. There it says dwellings in the NRSV, but it really is tabernacle. "Let me build a tabernacle for each of you." And a tabernacle, of course, is a place of worship, right? It's a dwelling, it's a place where God would reside. And the confusion there is that he's equating Moses and Elijah and Jesus as somewhat on the same scale, so to say. But he's quickly corrected by that booming voice, isn't he? "This is my Son. Listen to him." And when they fall down in fear, and when we're confronted by something that's really earth-shaking, what do as well? We fall down in fear. And we do that before God, but we do that before things that fear to us in life as well. And so they rise back up, and there is Jesus, and he tells them, "Follow me." And they go down the hill. And do not be afraid, brother, he says. Get up and do not be afraid. Last week, we talked about worry, didn't we? And, interestingly, I had a number of people tell me that was a great sermon. They loved the sermon, and I had a couple of people tell me it was my best sermon, and I was kind of like, really? Wow. I didn't know exactly how that sermon was coming across as I gave it. But worry has a great deal to do with fear, doesn't it? So if you'd like, just go back on YouTube. That video is on YouTube now. Just go back and listen to that sermon. I could just play it on my phone, except my phone is live streaming this. So we could just listen to that sermon again, and we probably should. I did listen to it, and it wasn't bad. For me, it was pretty good. So I'm pleased with that sermon. But fear is a great deal like worry. We worry because we're afraid. And worrying makes us become more afraid. And as I said, there's probably a reason why we come back to this. We talk a lot about fear. And fear not. Do not be afraid. God never tells us, by the way, go out and be scared to death. Does he? But he tells us, do not fear. We are called to be courageous in Christ. Now, one of the definitions of courageous is being afraid and going to do what needs to be done anyway. Isn't it? We've all seen that. And I'm not quoting that completely 100% correct, but you understand. Courage is being afraid of something, but knowing that God is with you. And that with God with you, ultimately, you're not going to fail. You might even die. But like I said last week, we're not here to live here. We're here to do God's work here. And if that requires or involves our demise, sometimes that's just what has to happen sometimes. God has a bigger plan. God has sent us to do his work. Sometimes that work is difficult. Sometimes that work causes sacrifice. And unfortunately, many times we are so wrapped up in ourselves that we don't think about the other. And we don't think about that we need to step out. There is that saying, and I remember in college, seeing the poster, because everything's very profound in college, isn't it? You see all these very wise sayings, and they're usually, now they're on memes, but when I was in school, they were on posters on people's walls. And I can remember vividly going into one of my friend's room, and they had just gotten a new poster, and it was stuck up with tape on the dorm walls, because you can't put nails in dorm walls. And it said, a ship in a harbor is safe. But that's not what ships are made for. We're God's people. We have this natural inclination to want to build structures and stay on that mountain, and dwell there where we're safe. Because to listen to God, to listen to Jesus, gets a little bit scary. In fact, it gets really scary really quickly. We find ourselves in an interesting place in history. And I would be remiss as a pastor not to address this from the pulpit. There is a scary thing going around. We talked about it briefly last week. This COVID-19, this coronavirus that's going around the world, is horrifyingly scary for some of us. And as I mentioned last week, there seems to be two schools of thought. There's the school of thought that this is just a big hoax. There's nothing to this. It's just like the flu. It's a cold. People get sick. People die. That's all there is to it. It's no big deal. Just carry on. No need to change anything. And then there's a school of thought that the world is going to burn down and all is lost. And in the end, we're all going to die. And as I said then, I'm more the middle. I can see the danger. And I know that it's going to change the world. I can recognize that. But I also understand that we can't and we shouldn't panic so much that we withdraw and withhold ourselves and we take ourselves out of the world. Because you're not supposed to put your light under a basket. We're not supposed to disappear. We're not supposed to just give up and think only of ourselves. Social isolation is one of the things that they're saying, and yes, there is an element of that we need to do, and there is a certain segment of the population that this virus is much more at risk for. And there are certain segments that it is not so scary for. But we have to be careful that we control the spread of it. So we have to do some smart things. And the Christian Council met this week. I told you last week that they would meet, and we did meet. We met on Tuesday night, And we decided that as a committee, or as a council, that council would be a committee to keep an eye on what's going on in the world and what needs to be done and what practices we as a church may need to adopt and what programs we might need to adopt to help those that might be self-isolating. Because some of us, especially the more elderly and the infirm, may need to have a period of time where we don't get out in public as much. But yet those people are going to need food and supplies, and they're going to need some human interaction on the phone, if nothing else. Because in isolation, you're going to go crazy if you have no human contact. So at least we need to understand, and we need to address that. We need to think about how we can be God's light in the world in this scary time. Because it is scary for many of us. But fear's okay. Courage means you keep going. Courage means you know that God's with you. Courage means that even if I fail, it's okay. Because I tried. I did what God called me to do. And that's what I have to do. So the Christian Council will keep their eye on what's going on. And they will come up with ideas and ideas to implement. Because this is a big part of it is worship and dealing with the membership and the fellowship of the church. So this is something that falls not under the church council, but under the Christian council. So, having said that, this Wednesday, the ministers in Lake City are meeting over at the Catholic Church. I called everyone and I organized a ministerial association meeting. We'll meet with someone from the hospital that's going to come and talk to us, and we're going to talk about what we plan. This week, Clyde and Scotty and I went to a FEMA and Homeland Security meeting that was about disaster preparedness. Now, disaster preparedness doesn't mean that we think that the world is going to burn down necessarily, but it means that we have a plan. We don't panic, but we be prepared. We think about what, if this happens, this is what we'll do. This is how we'll handle it. So if you'd like to help the Christian Council, if you'd like to come to the meeting, let me know. We'll call you when we have one of those meetings. But know that we are watching it. Know that we are aware of it. Know that we're going to let you know what we think we need to do together. The one thing that you may have noticed today as you came into the church is that there are hand sanitizers in a couple of different places. Here in the sanctuary where the bulletins are at, there's bottles of hand sanitizer. There's a couple in the kitchen. There's one in the office. There's one on my desk as well. And we do ask that when you come in, just take a couple squirts of hand sanitizer to try to minimize the spread of not only this COVID-19, but flu and viruses of colds and what have you. It's just a common sense thing. And let's use common sense. Common sense isn't particularly common though. So let's just use a little common sense. Now we will ask at some point, I'm not sure that we need to worry about it quite yet, but at some point we may say, let's not do any more handshaking in church. Okay? And then we'll see what happens. But right now I don't think we're at that point necessarily. But we should use the hand sanitizers. Try to remember to wash your hands regularly. The one thing I don't want you to do is to panic. Now, at risk of upsetting my family, Friday, Gail and I went to Omaha. Okay? And Friday, consequently, they announced that they had the first COVID-19 patient in Omaha. And that it was that the person had gone into Methodist Hospital. Well, my mother freaked out because Gail and I were at Methodist Hospital. Well, never mind the fact that she presented herself at a different facility, not the facility that we were at, because Gail's mother is at Methodist Hospital, not doing particularly well. So my mother freaks out and my sister freaks out, and they don't want me to come to the funeral because obviously I was in Omaha and now I must be infected. You know that in the Omaha area there's roughly 1 million people. And this woman, first of all, was extreme western Omaha, Elkhorn and Fremont area. We weren't anywhere near there. But what you cannot do in this circumstance is go nuts like that and disassociate yourself from family. You can't withdraw from family. You can't say, oh, I can't go, and mother's not going to her brother's funeral because she's afraid that she's going to get COVID-19. And I shouldn't pick on my mother, but I am disappointed, and I'm quite irritated about it. You don't do that to your family. This is not to that stage here. Now, if you were in China, Wuhan, if you were in South Korea, maybe in the places where it's at, but in the Midwest, it's just not here yet, folks. It may never get here. We'll pray that it never gets here. Let's not go nuts. Let's not go freaking out about this and disrupting and breaking and damaging our relationships with one another. But having said that, if it does get here, if things do require a Herculean effort, guess what? We spend our entire lives wondering why we are here in this world. Possible. God does not cause bad things to happen, but God brings silver linings out of it. Think about it. Search your heart. If it does get here, perhaps the reason you were here was to minister to someone, to care for someone, to call someone that's isolated on the phone and to visit with them so they might have some human interaction. Or if you're of the demographic that's not at such risk, perhaps you are called, and maybe it's, if you don't have little children, the little children really aren't affected by this. Maybe you are called to be one of those people that's able to shuttle supplies to the people that do have to self-isolate. Maybe that's why you were put here. Or maybe you were put here for some other reason in this that we can't even envision yet. Rather than look at this as a reason to panic, we need to look at this as a way that we can be God's people. We need to search this, and we need to search our hearts. I need to search my own heart because I'm prone to, I fixate on things. And my wife will say, yeah. And I've been watching this very closely ever since we were in Israel. Actually, even before we got home, I had picked up on this news story, and I, for various reasons I'm not going to go into now, I've always kind of been fixated about epidemic type things, and so I've been watching this closely for a long time now. But we can't let that drive us into a point where we're not doing God's work. Because whether I live today or I die tomorrow does not matter. What matters is that I did God's will while I was here. And that, whatever that might have been, whatever this may come to be, may just be why any one of us is put on this planet to begin with. We all, as I said, are searching for our purpose. Why did we live? And your purpose might be that when this goes again, that you, if you're one of those people that have to self-isolate, guess what? We have technology. You can call all the people in the directory of the church and visit with them. The ones that you know are shut in as well. So they have someone checking in on them. We can all find something to do no matter what happens. So again, let's not panic. Let's not let this become a wedge between us and our families and people around the world. Let's be God's light in this time of fear and darkness. Let's be God's transformation in God's world. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so very much for the message that Matthew gives us, for the message of Christ, the glory of God shown through Jesus. And Jesus asked us to not be afraid to welcome his light into our lives. Lord, we are asked to be his light into a dark, dark world. And Lord, forgive us when we are afraid. Forgive us when we fall short. Forgive us for so many things. Things I don't have enough time this morning to list, to be quite frank. Lord, bless us, guide us, transform us. We pray this today in your love and glory. Amen. It's time now